Okay, so in this video we're going to be looking at querying our MySQL database using PDO. We've already prepared everything, so we have created our config array, we have connected or instantiated a PDO object, and we've connected to our database or our MySQL server and sort of hooked into our database. So now we want to get to the fun stuff. We want to actually go ahead and query a database and loop through some results. And what we're going to be looking at is we're going to be looking at a loop. So we're going to be looping through a result set. We're also going to be looking at grabbing all results and then sort of outputting a specific result that we want. So, you know, just sort of covering both bases really. Right, so the first thing we need to do is use the query method. Now, there is another way of doing this, it's preparing, but we're going to look at that a bit later on because it offers some other advantages. So, I'm going to use the query method. And in here, I'm basically just going to, type an SQL query. So I'm going to say select articles.title. And I'll just pop over to my browser to refer to this. So we've got articles.title, so we're selecting the titles from here, and that's from articles, so from the articles table. So what this is going to do is it's going to return 20 results because we've only got 20 results here, so 20 in total. That's going to return all of those, and we're going to want to go ahead and loop through them, or pick out specific results, but we'll look at both. So I've gone ahead and refreshed, and we don't seem to have any errors, so I assume everything's okay. Right, so the traditional method of looping through a database would be to create a while loop. It would be to say row equals MySQL fetch assoc, which means associative, and we'd pass in the link to the query that we've created. So basically this would be query equals this. However, we're not using this method. We're using this sort of loop, but we're not using MySQL fetch assoc or associative, however you want to say it, because we're using PDO. We're using a generic database handler. So what do we need to do? Well, we need to use the fetch method from the database, from PDO. Now, the first thing to note is, I'll just go ahead and get rid of this. I have created this variable query because this query method returns the PDO statement object. Now the PDO statement object has a set of methods that allow us to do things with results or do things to a prepared SQL query. So the query variable here now contains the PDO statement object, which contains an entirely different set of methods. So what we're going to do here is we're going to say print our query. So let's go ahead and check this out. Here we go. So PDO statement object. Now this is where we know that we've now returned a PDO statement object, and it contains this query string here, and this is the query that we passed through. So what we can do now is we can use the methods from the PDO statement object that's been returned to do things like fetch, fetch all, get the row count, which we'll look at in the next video. So what are we going to do now? Well, we're going to use our while. However, we're going to do exactly the same thing as here. We're going to say while row is equal to something, but this time what we're going to do is we're going to use query, and we're going to use the fetch method. Now in here what we need to do is we need to specify how we're fetching this. So we use PDO, we use our scope resolution operator to go ahead and access fetch assoc. This just basically tells us that how we're fetching it. So in this case it will be an associative array. So this really looks the same as what we've just seen, but it operates differently, and again ties into the fact that this is a generic handler for databases in general. So now we can go ahead and echo row title, and then just place a break on for now. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. You can see that it's now output the list of article titles that we have stored in here. So let's go ahead and just examine this a bit more in depth. I'm going to say rows equals this here. So we're fetching an associative array. Let's go ahead and print this. Now you'd expect it to return an array of all of the results. However, that's not the case. Much like MySQL fetch a sock, it only returns one. When you're in a while loop, it will access it every single time and return it within the loop for every item there is. However, we also have a fetch all. Okay, now fetch all will return all of the results. So if we go ahead and echo pre, so place this within some pre-formatted tags, pass true in here, and we'll see this in a big list here. So this is using the fetch all method as opposed to the fetch method. We're still returning as an associative array. If we loop through, we're going to have each of these elements that will then be able to access title. So for example, if we were to go ahead and also query this for the ID, so select the ID as well. This will then place the ID for each article in there as well, along with any other fields that you might have in your in your columns, I mean, if you have any more columns. So we've done it this way. What we can also do is we can also specify, well, we can specify how we want these returned. So I'm going to choose fetch num. Now this would basically keep it the same, but it will just fetch a numeric array. So instead of this being associative and having the name of the field, it just contains 0, 1, and then it will go 2, 3, 4, 5, you know, onwards for however many fields that you have. So that's how we basically access different results. Now, why would you want to use fetch all? Well, you may have, for example, a list of config. You know, you may have a database table with different config values in, and you don't want to go ahead and loop through them. It's absolutely pointless. You just want, say, for example, config like this, and you might want to go ahead and say echo config 0. Well, you might want to do for title, and if we set this to ASOC, so basically this is going to select the 4th article, or we could even just call this articles to make things less confusing. So you might want to access the 4th article's title. Okay, so in this case it would just output this, and if we go ahead and here we can see the 4th one is social media. Well, it's 5th, but that's because obviously it's 0 indexed, so it's essentially showing the 5th. Okay, so that is how we grab a result set from a query. That's how we loop through our results, and also we've taken a look at fetch a sock and fetch numeric array as we normally would with the MySQL fetch a sock or MySQL fetch array. So that's basically it for looping through result sets. In the next tutorial, we're going to look at how we can get the amount of rows that have been returned.